All right, let's get started. Hey, everybody, it's good to see you. I'm Matt. I'm your professor. I'm making these tutorials for our performative avatars class. So yeah, we're just going to get started right at the beginning. I know this little green screen edge thing is a little not perfect, but we'll roll with it. I hope the audio quality is okay. So yeah, just to set up the what's going on here, I'm working on a Windows desktop. I have two monitors. You'll only be seeing one monitor, obviously. Everything in the other monitor is my recording kind of setup and stuff. Um, and yeah, you're probably not going to have the exact same computer I have. Most of it should work and be consistent. I will say it'd be most consistent if you're working on Windows. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. This video is really just about installing Unreal Engine, what's the interface like, what are some tips and tricks of how to manage things and demystify a few things. So let's go ahead and get started. And I know the screen is maybe a little overblown, or the size scale is kind of hard to see on YouTube. Once I open Unreal Engine, I will scale it so it's much easier to pick up. So right here, I just Googled Epic Games. Epic is the company that makes Unreal Engine. So you can go ahead and get it there. If you did not know this, Unreal Engine is made by the people that made Fortnite. Fortnite is made with Unreal Engine. So Epic Games is, you can actually just see right in, I promise I didn't plan for that. It's just the two things you see right when you open it up. So we're going to go ahead and get started with Unreal Engine. You'll want to make an Epic Games account. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in here. And I have a password manager, so I'll just log in right there. This will just make things easier. It's totally free, like I was saying. And then I believe somewhere in here, if you go to Unreal Engine, you can find out more. There's a download button right here. And this is important to kind of understand. Unreal Engine is free, but it has an interesting model. I would never call it necessarily open source. It is managed by a for-profit company. But the reason it's free, or the way it works, is Unreal Engine only makes money from a percentage of what you sell once you sell over a certain amount of units. I think if you earn, I'm totally spitballing here, but if you earn $1 million from selling a game made with Unreal Engine, I think every sale after they get 10% of all your sales or something. What does that mean? It means it's great for us. I do not want to make assumptions about anyone in this class, but I would guess by and large most of us are not going to be making something that goes on to sell millions of units. We'll probably be doing more bespoke installations and whatnot, and that all is free. That's all within the publishing license we have here. And I would say I guess you would want to use a creator's license. I think publishing license is a little different. It also says suitable for learning and personal projects. I don't think it matters too much. I actually don't fully understand the difference between these. Maybe just go ahead and do the creator's license because it gives you more options. I don't think you're going to get in trouble with anyone. I already installed it, so I'm not going to install it again. But once you install it, you should get something called the Epic Games Launcher. And it looks like this. It's a little tricky because it's both your kind of interface for managing your Unreal Engine versions and project files and marketplace. And it's also kind of a Steam-like game sales platform. So a little weird at first. You might have to log into with the password and stuff. But I think it's over here. I think if I were to, somewhere in there is where you get the games and stuff. Anyway, I'm in Unreal Engine 4. Unreal Engine 5 is fast on its heels. It's in beta right now, and it should be out by the fall, I've been hearing. Do not use it for this class. I mean, it is not even beta. It's a sneak preview access thing. It's just really not worth jumping into that right now. And a lot of what you're learning here will carry over, so don't feel like it's you're behind the curve or anything. I will probably continue using Unreal Engine 4 a year past Unreal Engine 5 being out, just because it's so well supported at this point. It's kind of a little wiki here, or not even wiki, just a little magazine style layout of just topics and stuff. There's a button here for learning. You can find different kind of tutorials. These are actually asset pack project tutorials you can download. Marketplace is interesting to know about. It's a lot like the Unity asset store. You can buy, there's free things you can get. There's also things you can buy, code, also assets like 3D models, sound, all this stuff. I use it sometimes. I wouldn't go straight into it. One thing that's nice is it's usually optimized for Unreal Engine, so you don't have to worry about once you get into this and you try to download other things, it can get a little tricky. Just know that this is here. This is what we want to get to, which is the library area right here, and this is where you do all your like project kind of like coordination stuff. You probably don't have anything here at the moment. Maybe you do. Maybe you have a previous one. I just want to reiterate what we're going to use for this class is 4.26.2. Please use that one. Any project files I send you, it's gonna be a pain in the ass. You can convert between project versions. It's just so much simpler if you don't. So if you want to use the files I'm using, and you can have multiple versions installed on your computer. I would have 4.26, but these are beefy. They have a lot. It's like maybe 20 gigabytes for each version, and you could possibly go even higher than that. I'll show you some tricks to reduce it. But you can see here I have a couple of options. If you want to install one, if you click Engine Versions, it gives you this with a drop-down menu. So let's say I chose an older one. And this is the biggest tip I would give you around installing. I think if you go to Install and Options, this is showing you everything that's installing. If you scroll down, you can see it's calculating required storage. There's also these target platforms here. Android for your phone, HTML5, iOS, Linux, literally the iOS TV operating system. You can see they pack. I almost guarantee you're not going to be using any of these development platforms unless you're kind of like a Linux geek or whatnot. So if you can actually see if it's 20 gigs right here. If I just deselect these, it lowers it in half. So I would go ahead and do that, and then you can hit apply, and then you could hit install. I wouldn't mess with the folders or the paths. I'm not going to install it again, obviously, because I've already got all this. I'm just kind of showing you everything. And that's kind of what I did here with 4.26.2. I think if you already installed something, you can actually go to options, and you can see I took all those off. My projects is where it can show you any of the projects you've been working on, and then anything you bought in the asset store, like plugins, assets you could install. Sometimes you add to a project, sometimes you install it to an engine, so if anytime you open up a thing in that engine, it's visible. Yeah, that's just kind of giving you an overview of all that. So I'm going to go 4.26.2 here and hit launch. And this is one of the things that might take a few minutes. Take a sip of water while it's getting going. Depending on the operating system you're using and your age of your computer, it can take a while to open things up. I think it just green screened out that bottle. Good, you won't see what kind of water I was drinking. Now Steam is looking for my VR headset. That's probably gonna pop up again. So here's where it's going to show you some recent projects. It's kind of redundant. If you go down to new project categories, it has a lot of like pre-built things. So there's games, film, television. It's like almost virtual production. Worth looking into. Honestly, like I wouldn't touch that right now if you're new to Unreal, because even though we'll get into some of those topics, these things assume a certain level of like literacy and this kind of stuff. Same with these others. So we're just going to go ahead and go with games. And in games, there's some basic templates we can work with. And you can see these templates right here. There's blank, which we're going to go with in just a second. And there's also like first person. That's a type of video game where you look from the first person perspective, usually like shooting games. We'll talk about that in this class. Third person, which is like an over the shoulder kind of camera kind of thing. There's a lot of things here. They're very video game oriented. I honestly never use anything besides third person and virtual reality. The virtual reality one is actually incredibly helpful if you want to mess with virtual reality. It gives you really kind of like out of the box tools for things like hand tracking and teleporting and whatnot. And then third person we'll look at this in next week's tutorials. It just like touches on a lot of stuff around avatar control and perspective. first person you could mess with. It's not really in my wheelhouse in the rest of the game. So I'm going to go with blank. It gives you some options here. Blueprint. We're going to talk about blueprints. Unreal Engine is based on C++ as a coding language. Like a lot of software packages, pseudo programming language kind of systems, there is a node-based interface for Unreal Engine, and that's actually one of the biggest draws to it for me. I mean, I'll be upfront, I am not a coder in a traditional sense. I know a little bit of Python. I failed at JavaScript. You know, I did P5. Actually, we did processing when I was a student. But I've done the same things you might have done up to this point. But I have been doing node programming for about 10 years, and I love it. It's just a much higher level version of coding. And we'll see. You'll see how you take to it. Some people like it, some people don't. I would not recommend going straight to C++. You need Windows Visual Studios installed. C++ is a beast. Like, I know good coders that struggle with that. So unless you're just like, you know, like A+ software engineer level person that already, frankly, probably knows Unreal coming into this class, I just wouldn't even touch it. So stick with Blueprint. Maximum quality is great. Let's stick with that. I think the scalable 3D, 2D, I think that's more for like deploying to phones and stuff. We're not going to explore that. Ray tracing, disable it. It does a lot of things around GPUs and light reflections that can make your stuff look like, but we're not going to, I personally, my stuff doesn't look like that anyway. Desktop console, same thing. We're doing desktop console. And here's the next big thing that we want to keep on track. Starter content. This just gives you a bunch of assets right off the back. 3D meshes, some other things that you can play around with, kind of a starter pack. I'm going to use it for this single video, just because it'll give me some stuff to show you all what's going on. But I generally don't use it after that, partly because it adds about 750 megabytes to any project you do. And it quickly kind of just like adds complexity to your folder structure for your project. But we'll do that while we're learning. It's a good place to start. So I'll say starter content. I'll add that. And then the last thing is like, where do you put your project? I tend to go to my documents, and I think it even makes one for you called Unreal Projects. So maybe I'll select that. And actually, maybe even like I'll just do a new folder called Teaching Tutorials. If I remember how to type. And I'll say, this is the project name, week 1, interface. Oh, I can't do, I'll do an underscore. I have my microphone right in front of my keyboard, so it's a little tricky sometimes. All right, create project. Cool. So it's going to spin this up. Like I said, it might take a few minutes. VR continues. Every time there's even a hint that it wants to do some VR, it pops up. This is Unreal Engine. Welcome. We're really happy to have you here. The water's fine. Everything's scaled really crazy right now. Not even scaled crazy, it's just that for you, the viewer on YouTube, it's probably hard to read all this tiny text. It is dense. Unreal Engine has lots of windows. It's like a programming and a 3D, like not modeling, but the kind of 3D interface engine all in one. So one thing I'm going to do right away, you don't have to do this. I'm just, we'll take a tour in just a little bit. But I'm going to go to Window here. I think if I go to Developer Tools, Widget Reflector, we're really starting simple right here. I can go in here and I can change the application scale. And that is a lot better. It's a much... So things are very dense right now. There's a little thing that's just like bugging me, so I wanted to close that, so dismiss. But at least now it's a little more legible for you, those of you watching on your tinier screens. So what do we have here? We have the Unreal Editor. This is called the Editor. And we're just going to kind of walk through all the different things. In the center here is probably the most eye-catching, like the obvious place to start. We have a chair here, we have a table, there's kind of like a sky in the background. And another thing I forgot to mention is you're going to have such a better time if you have a mouse. Like, it's almost impossible to do this with a trackpad. You're just going to be in a lot of pain. That's true for any kind of 3D navigation stuff. If you're in Maya or Blender or stuff, just mouse, mouse, mouse. I can't recommend it enough. It's going to hold you back if not you're not using a mouse. So I'm going to right click over this, and this is called the Viewport. We're in the Viewport display. We're viewing, this is almost like a portal into the 3D world. You know, we have a camera almost, and we're looking through that camera into this 3D world. If I right click and just move my mouse around, I can pan the camera. You can see I can kind of move around and look. I can move all the way behind me. I'm just holding down the right mouse button here and let go, and you can see my cursor. Hopefully you can see it in this recording. The cursor pops back up. And yeah, so that's panning. Then if we hold the pan button, that right click, and now if I go to my keyboard, if you're familiar with WASD, I'm actually going to pull back for a second and talk about that. WASD on your keyboard is kind of a video game convention. W moves forward, A moves left, D moves right, S moves back. If you've ever played a kind of first-person shooter video game, that's the standard on a keyboard. So I'm going to hold right-click again, like I was saying, where I'm pan. And if I say S, you can see it moves me back. And if I say W, it moves me forward. A, it moves me left. D, it moves me right. I think Q is down and E is up. So you have that available as well. And, you know, just to say, if you pan while you're moving forward, you're going to move in that direction. And, you know, and like now I'm just kind of, you know, this just takes a little bit of practice. I'm guessing a lot of you already have this literacy, and I apologize if this is redundant, but it's, you know, there's going to be a lot of things to cover that I just want everyone to have some awareness of. If you have a scroll wheel on your mouse, and this is called a middle click, if you push the scroll wheel in, it gives you kind of not like a pan and not a move. I think it's called grab. You're like literally grabbing it and moving all that. So that's another option you have available to you. And then left mouse click, the most basic of the mouse clicks, is like a select. So now you can see I'm actually clicking on different things, and I'm going to right click and move down and kind of center my perspective here. I'm like kind of tapping away, you can probably hear it. And left click just lets me choose all these different things. So what are we looking at here? Again, I'm going to pan around. Let's like deconstruct what we're seeing here. We have a platform. We have this sphere that I'm not quite sure. We have this dome with some light coming out of it. We have the sky. So the majority of these things are what's known as a mesh, or asset, I guess you could say, but it's a static mesh specifically. And a static mesh is just a 3D object. That's what we're talking about when we talk about a 3D object. And the static means that we'll get into the difference between a skeletal mesh, which is more avatar specific, and a static mesh, which means it doesn't have a skeleton, which means it's more static. We can live with that definition for the moment. And you can see that if I click on the chair, I want to direct you over to the next area of our interface, and that's the world outliner. And this is almost like a kind of like label, like spreadsheet system for if we can see and select everything in our viewport in our 3D environment. This is also a place to choose things and see what is in there that we've added into it, and have a more direct kind of interface with that. And you can see if I click on the table, it highlights something in the world outliner called table. And I'm going to make this a little bigger just to get some stuff. And you can see that it's telling me the type of asset it is. In this case, a static mesh actor. An actor is anything in like an individual component or asset within our game port. That would be different maybe than like a class, where you can spawn as many of those as you want. An actor is a specific thing, even if it's a copy of another mesh. If I click on the chair, then we get that here. Inversely, let's say I wanted to find a chair just from here. There's the statue. If I click on the statue in the world outliner, it finds it in the viewport. So, you can go back and forth. You can select different things. One thing that's a little helpful, jumping ahead a tiny bit maybe, is if I hold right click and I have something selected, if I hit the F key, not holding right click, just typing F with not holding any of the keys. It stands for focus. And what's nice about it is it will literally just jump your camera to whatever it is you have selected, and it will like fill up the viewport screen with it. So I could click on the chair over here and I hit F, and now it's focused. So if you get lost kind of navigating things, if you select something on here and you're looking all around and you don't know which way is up or which way is down, you hit F. Again, that's not a perfect thing because it doesn't know that thing is blocking it, but at least gives you a sense of it'll snap your camera to that. So that's some things to think about. Let's take a look at some of the other things out here, and I'll probably start getting rid of some of it. I can select this, and you can see that there's a skylight and there's a light source. There's things like and you can even see in a type, it tells me a little bit about it. It's like kind of literal, it's a skylight. There's this player start thing. It's a type player start. There's a start background cue. It's ambient sound. And one thing that's nice is there's all these folders. These folders really tell me what it is. Like, I could even drop out here to kind of organize things. And I can see that maybe the static meshes and the most visible things. Some of these are a little more complex. And I'm going to get rid of some of this fluff. We're not really going to cover some of this stuff in the class, but audio, if you hit the play button, which we'll get to, it would have given you a little audio cue. We don't need that. I'll get rid of the whole folder. We'll keep the player start and talk about that in a second. Skylight, this just like helps add some like a bounce or reflections, I think. This light source is essentially our sun. We'll talk about that in a second. You can see I get rid of it and not a whole lot changes. And just to clarify, I'm hitting the delete key on my keyboard as I do this. Definitely don't need reflection capture actors. This is like optimization kind of stuff. We can keep this BP sky sphere. We'll start to get into what a BP or what's known as a blueprint is. Atmospheric fog, if you're wondering what something does, just delete it and you might get a quick idea. And you can always Control Z to bring it back. And yeah, now get rid of, what do these volumes say? Global post-process, we're not going to talk about that in this class too much. You can see I got rid of some things, and now it's just not quite as professional looking, maybe, if you want to say, but for where we are, don't worry about it. Let's stick with some of the basics here. Let's go back to our chair here. Let me actually just focus in on the chair. Cool, and then I'll just, and you know what, if your camera is moving way too fast, if you find yourself just like going crazy, up here in the right corner, it's something called camera speed. And I can usually bring that down to 2. Now you can see that things are just a lot more chilled out. That's great for our purposes. So what's going on with this chair? When I select it, you might notice that each time I select any of these static meshes, there becomes this thing called, I believe it's called a gizmo. I've heard gumball too. But a gizmo is basically shows you the 3 primary axes. I don't know if there's something that's a non-primary axis. That just sounds right when I say it. But basically X, Y, and Z. X is red, Y is green, and blue is Z. And if you ever watch any tutorials from British folks, they call it Z. So that's just a difference you might hear. If I click on any of these arrows, actually let's go over to the chair. If I click on any of these arrows, you can see it kind of highlights as I hover. I'm just left clicking. I can move it on the Z axis, which is up and down in this case. X, like forward and back, green is left and right. There is a lot of relativity in what the X, Y, and Z directions are. Z is not always up, down. Each object can kind of have its own relative locational system. Don't worry too much about it. All these things have the same, as you can kind of see, but just these are not ground truths that override everything. But for the most part, yes, X is forward and back, green is left and right, and or Y is left and right, and Z is up and down. And I can also grab the middle, I think, and this allows for a more like free form. If I had only selected the X there, it locks it to that axis. But if I grab that white ball in the middle, it lets me kind of move around like that. And I could always change my angle and move it like that. This is called this is called the location. I can also go over here and actually, if you just look at this a little bit, select and translate objects. Our translation is the location kind of in some respects. Select and rotate. So I'm going to do that. And now this changes to more of a arc. And you can probably guess what happens with rotation. If I select the red, now it's rotating. And if I select the green, it's rotating on a different axis. And then all that, all good stuff. There are hotkeys. You can see this is W, this is E, this is R. So we'll talk about what R is in a second. But I can go back to translate with the I have my fingers misplaced on the keyboard. You can see I'm highlighting. So if I ever am moving between rotate and translate, and you're wondering how, it's because of hotkeys. So that is all good to know. I'll go back to rotate. I feel like I had something. So, another thing to note is this static mesh. Where does it rotate from? That has to do with what the pivot point is. It's less obvious what the pivot point is of something or how it affects movement when it's just translation or location. But once I rotate, you can see that this little white ball is the pivot point of the this static mesh. So now when I rotate, it's going to rotate it from that point, not the center of the chair, which might seem more obvious. Each actor or each asset has its own pivot point, and that usually has to do with the place it was 3D modeled and the way it was exported. There are some hacks to reset the pivot point in Unreal, and I'll show you how to do that later down the road. Lastly, you can scale an object. That's the last one of the kind of transform abilities. And again, you start to see where this is going. I can kind of have some fun with that. You could transform scale the whole thing like that. So that is just the kind of navigation of assets and objects. Usually, a lot of times what you'll end up doing though is now that I've shown you the world outliner, I want to show you the details panel down here. This is these are kit and caboodle, part and parcel, however you want to think about it. Once you select a asset in your world, you bring up a details panel specific to it. And what's nice here is you can see that I have location, rotation, and scale. And I could actually type in absolute values and numerical values. And there will be a lot of times where you want to do that. It's just simpler to kind of nudge something to what you want. You could also lock the aspect ratio of the scale so that everything scales. It keeps the same shape as it scales bigger, or you could do individually to get this back down to where it was, you can see. And there's a lot of other things we'll talk about. This static mesh, we could choose a different static mesh to represent it. This is basically just kind of not a shell, it's just this is a static mesh actor, and we can place other static meshes in it. Materials we'll talk about more in the next class, but essentially this is the color information. A 3D mesh does not have color baked into it. We need to wrap it with what's called a texture, and the materials talks about how light reflects off of it. If I could put this other thing called chrome ball on it, that's a little dark. Maybe I'll try this brick hewn stone. And you can see now if I'm moving close, we've replaced it. We can make this kind of stone chair. It's also things like simulate physics. I'm kind of there's a lot of things to cover here. So take a look at it. Honestly, everything below maybe collision, or just almost never going to touch in this. I don't know if I've ever touched anything below rendering, except in extreme use cases. Generally, transform, materials, physics, collision, and lighting are the most important things that we would ever even begin to touch on. Let's continue on a little bit. Remember how I said we were doing starter content? Now if we go to our content browser, I'm actually going to do the sources panel over here. This is all of our content that we're working with. So we added all these things. There's a pre-built kind of level. I have it set right now. I think I'm blocking. I apologize. Maybe I can just move this over really quick. This view options. I have something that says show engine content. I'm going to disable that just for a moment because I think it would make it confusing. These are things that are built into the engine, but you're not supposed to touch. So over here though, content, we have our starter content folder. And if I drop down, You can see I have a lot of options here. They're well organized. There's architecture, audio files, and actually I'm going to go to here in my view options. Again, I am blocking it physically. I'm going to bring my thumbnail scale down. There we go. You probably don't need to do that. I just did because I thought it was kind of crazy. And these are all different assets we have. And you can see there's even a color code. There's also like a naming convention. So it's the architecture stuff. This is a static mesh, and these are walls, some with like windows in it. And I can drag anything here into my scene. And you can see I just brought this wall, and it's pretty massive. If I wanted to try and line it up to, I could get it here. I could, oh my gosh, like move so slowly just to look around here, like slap it in right there. I could always like Control C, copy, and I could slide it over here. Let's see, the seam kind of good right there. And that's pretty good. We're starting to build like kind of a room kind of situation. You can see that now I have something called wall door 400, 300. I could also just rename that, I believe, by double clicking wall door static mesh. Again, you see like you drag it into the folder. Also, if you ever want to like, isolate things, you can turn this eye cursor on and off. But, it's all just the more options. Audio files, blueprint, we'll get into all of that. There's just a lot here. I don't want to overwhelm you. I'm sure I already have. But just know this is where you're keeping track of things that you can bring in. And these are for things you created. The last thing we'll look at over here, or not last, but is a little bit different. And so let's leave the confines of this content folder. And now we have our place actors menu. This gives us kind of like built-in things, and this is different than the starter content. These are like things that are like inherent to the engine itself. Things like a cube, you can bring that in, and you're like, what's the difference between this wall and then this cube? The cube is not a great example of this, but just know that you have some basic shapes that you could play with. Things that maybe are a little more interesting are things like a camera. Like, what if I wanted a camera in my scene? If I type camera in here, I can drag in a camera. And again, my scale's making this a little bit difficult, but this is the perspective of the camera. Normally it would be much smaller and not blown up like this. So cameras are not a great thing. I'm going to have to think about this for future tutorials if it does this every time I highlight a camera. I'll delete the camera just to say, but there's that. Things like lighting. If I bring a point light, and we'll talk about light a little bit later, you can see I'm dragging it in, and as I put it over things, it is great. There's great lighting, and I can move it. Again, you can see the kind of a sphere of influence, and just to demystify some of this, if I go to the details panel, I can control the intensity of the light color, the radius. So this is kind of the, there's intensity, but then there's also like how far does the light cast to a certain sense. So, these are things that are built in, and you'll get into things that are much more complex, that are almost more like versions of code and stuff. And then just like, where is the light coming from the scene? I think that's actually something that's kind of interesting and necessary to cover. If I go back up here, we had our light source. There's something called a directional light, and a directional light is a sun. You only need one. Don't do more than 2 directional lights, or no more than 1, I should say. It is literally just a pervasive light that it doesn't matter where it is. The only thing that kind of matters is maybe the rotation. You can see if I rotate it, it's just like the sun moving through. It's wax and wane. I guess that's more of a moon thing. Actually, that's not moon. That's a totally different thing. It's the rise and fall of the sun in the sky based on the angle. And you could always like have it be a slight bit more. And I think I can actually focus right in it. Oh, there it is. So, if you wanted an easier interface, you could look at it like that. It does not matter where it is. You can move it. You do not need to put it in a sun location, it just is. It's pervasive. It's kind of good to have it close to your scene. And you can actually see there's an arrow that comes off of it that you can kind of use as a reference point of the angle it's doing all that stuff at. Cool. Let's just continuing a little further, I'm going to move this out a little bit. Oh, this isn't great, but all to say, like you can save everything up here. There's a lot of stuff we almost don't need to copy paste, all the kind of basic things. If you ever delete a window by accident or drag off, then you can probably bring it back here. There's just a lot of them you kind of have to get through. Some other things I didn't mention, grid. If I'm moving things, you can see that I guess they're not close enough to it, but I get close to this cube and move it, you can see it's kind of snapping. I could turn off the grid snap and it would give me free rotation like in decimal points here, whereas before with it on you can see it's increments of 10. I could change that increment here. Same with rotation, increments of 10, turn that off, free rotation. All good things to know. Some other things, you can change the perspective. Right now we just have perspective, but if you wanted to do more of like a CAD blueprint, I should not use the word blueprint because we're going to talk about this later. It's a very specific thing, but kind of like an architectural drawing of what you're all doing. You could look at the top viewpoint, and now you get a wireframe of everything, and sometimes it can be a little easier to lay out architectural stuff like this before you go back and look at it all. If I want the looking at it like that, you could also do like looking at it from the right perspective, and then I think there's also an option where you can do 4 viewpoints all at once, and you could actually set up different ones. And this gets a little into why it would be nice to have multiple monitors as you're working on a project. But I'll just turn all that back off and go back to perspective. You could also do things like look at everything unlit, so light doesn't affect it. You could even do a wireframe from perspective. These are all things, worth knowing about for the moment. Lastly, because this video has also already gone pretty long, again, you can save specific files as you make changes to it, but also like save all just saves everything. I generally have never used any of these. I guess like settings is always worth knowing. Generally like project settings and editor settings, editor preferences are where you'll make changes to how the editor functions. The thing we want to really look at is there's a play button. And there's an active play mode. Usually you can see the play button. Because my screen's scrunched, I have to do this drop down. So I'm going to go back to active play mode. And I want we're selected viewport. And I am just going to say, oop, that's the wrong one. Oh, I am playing. Sorry, I got a little confused there. We have this player start button right here, or like asset. So when I hit play, it'll snap me there as if that's my character. And now I don't even need to right click and hold down. I can just move. It's almost like a little video game, but because we haven't programmed, you can see I can't move through this wall. I'm basically just a camera that's flying around being controlled with WSD, and I have what's known as a collision capsule on the camera. And what that collision capsule is it's something that says like when this interacts with another collision thing like this wall, block it. So this is like very video game logic. I can move through the door, all that. You also said lighting needs to be rebuilt. That you can ignore that, but we'll talk about what that means later on. If I hit escape, that takes me back to the editor. Another helpful thing, you can change active player mode to new editor window. And this gives you a window that kind of launches your game. So you could, if you ever want to screen record, this is a good way to kind of isolate rather than having to crop things. And yeah, ton of information. Last but not least, I'm going to minimize this. And I just want to say, like you could open your project back up with your Epic Games launcher. If you save all this, it should be there under week 1 interface. I just want to point out your projects are stored where you saved them. And I have something here called week 1 interface. If you remember, I made it. I'm sorry, this text is so small. This is all the stuff that's associated with your project file. If you double click this, it would open you can open it here. You don't have to do it from the launcher kind of thing. I wouldn't touch these, but these are kind of like local files, configurations. Maybe the most important one is your content folder. Everything you've added or subtracted, and I don't mean in the viewport, I mean like assets you manipulate. They're located here. As you add things in, it'll be visible here. So if you ever want to move a project, it's a little annoying sometimes because maybe you have a different engine version installed, but generally what I do is I zip this folder. You can do that pretty quickly with send to compressed zip. And I would move this whole foot. Don't grab one thing, don't grab them all and put them somewhere else. Just grab this folder, and that is something that you'll be able to move between computers. There's things like version control. They're honestly too complex at the moment, but if you ever want to talk to me about it, I have my own version control systems. But these, I will probably be sending you zip folders every week of any of the tutorials we did. So yes, I am not going to send you this project because this is literally just the starter content example. One last thing I should say. I'm sorry, that was so, like, I had it right there. There's also maps. Right now you're working with like this starter map. This is kind of like just for saving. It's good to know about maps. I could also go to minimal default. I click on it. You can see that it's not, I think this might actually be the one I'm working on. Oh, there's starter map where it gives you a lot more, like it can shows you a lot of different things if you want to explore that. Advanced lighting, double clicking that. There's much more going on here. You don't have to look at this, but I just want to say, like, maps or levels you can have multiple of them in a game or in a project. And each one will save as its own thing. So yes, that's it for this section. Explore. I've got other tutorials for you, both from me and things I'm recommending. But yes, welcome to Unreal Engine and have fun.